We've taken a decision to pause it because we want to get any implementation right.
The previous Justice Secretary, David Lammy, said that without early release, there would be no capacity in prisons in England and Wales by November. And Shabana Mahmood introduced the scheme.
Of course it's right that we continue to keep under review what we can do to ensure that the public is kept safe.
I listened to those politicians of all different political parties, from past Labour to the Conservatives and to the present Minister, and by God, do they talk a load of rubbish at times.
I am a Kemi Badenoch supporter, a truthful politician, and I've never voted Tory in my life.
No, I was going to say, you used to be a socialist.
Absolutely.
Hello and welcome to the show. Politicians of all sorts have always loved talking tough on law and order, but delivering on their promises, well, yes, you've guessed it, that's a whole other story. Today, it's Andy Burnham's turn, promising to protect the public by pausing the scheme his predecessor brought in to release criminals early. Let me show you what the then Justice Secretary Shabana Mahmood, now Home Secretary, said 2 years ago.
Members will know that our prisons are in crisis. The male prison estate has been running at around 99% capacity for 18 months, and we now know that my predecessor warned 10 Downing Street of the perils of inaction. And rather than address this crisis, the former Prime Minister called an election and left us a time bomb ticking away.
So what's gone wrong in the country's jails? The UK imprisons more people than any other Western European country, and that tough approach goes back to this man, Conservative Home Secretary Michael Howard.
Let's be clear. Prison works. It ensures that we are protected from murderers, muggers and rapists, and it makes many who are tempted to commit crime think twice.
More than 20 years later, subsequent Tory Justice Secretaries were very much cut from the same cloth.
Our party should always be the party of law and order. Tough punishments for those who commit crimes, standing on the side of the victims, enough prison places for the offenders who should be inside. By the time of the election next year, we will have 3,000 more adult male prison places than we inherited from the last government. Because remember what Labour did. They failed to provide enough prison places. So what did they do? They released thousands of violent offenders early. They left them to roam the streets, committing crime after crime when those people should have been inside.
Now, in fairness, I should say some did try a different approach. Like this chap, former Justice Secretary, one of this show's sofa guests, Michael Gove.
Our streets will not be safer, our children will not be properly protected, and our future will not be more secure unless we change the way that we treat offenders, and offenders then change their lives for the better. There is a treasure, if only you can find it, in the heart of every man, said Churchill, and it is in that spirit that we will work.
He also spoke about the importance of rehabilitation, as did David Gork.
Now, I'm clear about what purpose our prisons serve: protection, punishment and rehabilitation. But for prisons to do this well, we must get the basics of a safe, secure and decent environment right. Only an immediate and relentless focus on maintenance, infrastructure and staffing will allow us to make further progress, and we are acting on that.
But over the years, Justice Secretaries came and went, rather a lot of them. We're now on our 14th since 2010, and that is really part of the problem, because while many spoke about reform, they didn't actually do it, and they didn't cough up the cash. I've been digging through the numbers, and here's what I can tell you. Ministry of Justice analysis shows the Tories built a net total of 482 places in 14 years, just 34 a year. Labour says it's delivered 3,200 since 2024, but that figure's gross, not net, so it doesn't include cells that had to be closed down because they were decrepit or unusable, whereas the Tory figure does. So my conclusion, the PM may have shelved the early release scheme for now, but unless he finds even more cash, and he's already sprayed quite a lot of it around in his first 4 days in power, he may well have to reinstate it sooner than he'd like. Well, we've got a very busy show tonight. As we react to this decision we've had this afternoon to pause the early release policy, which the last government said was vital to stop prisons in England and Wales from overflowing. We'll hear from the government and the Prisoner Officers Union in just a moment, and we'll talk on the show about Andy Burnham's announcement today to try and help pubs. Plus, we'll hear from actor Dame Maureen Lipman. But before all of that, let's hear from Justice Secretary Alex Norris, who confirmed this afternoon that the early prison release scheme was being put on hold.
The Prime Minister and I have heard from victims and survivors and from people across the country about their concerns about the implementation of some very important elements of the Sentencing Act. We've taken the decision to pause it because we want to get any implementation right, to take those views of victims and survivors to be at the heart of it, and that's what we're doing. The next steps are that we as ministers, myself, the Prime Minister, are looking at the aspects of the implementation of this policy as to who might leave and when they would leave, but crucially as well, what information victims have, what say victims have had in this, to say to them, OK, that if individuals did leave, what control measures would give you reassurance about your life.
Well, let's bring in our chief political correspondent, John Craig. John, what have you been finding out?
Well, Mr Norris went on to say that some of those measures, control measures, were, for example, what he called alcohol tagging. I suppose that means, does that mean banning you from going to a pub, I suppose? Drug tagging, curbs on drug takers, exclusion zones, bans on people, for example, going anywhere near their victims if they're released. A statistic that came from Mr Norris during that interview, it was put to him that the number likely to be released or were going to be released in September alone was about 700, and he did concede that's the right order of magnitude. Now, we believe that the number that the government plans to release over a year was between 5,000 and 6,000. So the big announcement from the Prime Minister came this afternoon. Yesterday, you'll recall that he talked about reviewing the policy and making further statements. Well, he did indeed make a further statement because he started off by saying keeping the public safe will always be my top priority. He said he was working closely with Mr Norris. He said he'd instructed his team to put a pause on the changes that were due to start in September. That was September the 1st, and it was under the Sentencing Act that was brought in by Shabana Mahmood's successor. That was David Lammy. Second reading was last September, became law earlier this year. He said, this is Mr Burnham, no prisoners will be let out under this policy until we've conducted an urgent review and done everything we can to minimise risk to the public. Where changes are needed, we won't hesitate to make them. Well, this, of course, all follows the case of Andrew Harper, the PC, who was killed after he was dragged along by a car driven by three people. He'd gone to investigate over the theft of a quad bike. His widow has said that the suggestion that two of his killers, they got sentences of 13 years for manslaughter back in 2020. If they were going to be released early, that was deplorable. And his mother said Andrew Harper's mother said that was an insult. Now, of course, the Prime Minister wanted to spend the week talking about his cost of living measures, but he's been plunged into a full-blown law and order crisis in his first week. He has really responded pretty swiftly. He will no doubt believe that he is on the right side of public opinion here. He will believe that the public will be appalled at the prospect of some of these criminals being let out. And he's responded very quickly. But of course, this pause looks as though it could very quickly become a U-turn.
Indeed, John, thanks very much, and we'll get you back on to talk about that, I've no doubt, at the time. A little earlier, just before we came on air, I spoke to Justice Minister Jake Richards. Let's have a look. Jake Richards, I just want to put to you a quote from, I think, the Commons last month. You said, without the Sentencing Act, the courts would be at risk of grinding to a halt, preventing sex offenders and others from being brought to justice. Isn't that exactly what's going to happen now?
Well, no. What is being announced today by the Prime Minister is that he is looking at some of the implementation measures of the Sentencing Act. So just for your viewers, Cathy, in January of this year, the Parliament passed Sentencing Act, a piece of legislation which changed some sentencing arrangements. Some of those measures come into effect later in the year. But it's absolutely right that a new Prime Minister and a new Justice Secretary, and indeed any government, keep those implementation measures under review to ensure that the public are kept safe, the public have confidence in the system, and there is a sustainable prison system.
But it was absolutely right last month that you pressed ahead with those reforms, those early releases. You defended it to the hilt.
Well, I think the Commons debate that you're talking about, I made it very clear that any government that puts public safety first will, of course, always keep in mind the implementation arrangements of different sentencing changes. And that's what this government is doing. Look, there's a balancing act at the heart of this, Cathy. On the one hand, of course, any government's first priority is to keep the public safe and to ensure that victims have confidence in the system. At the same time, to do that, we have to have a functioning, sustainable prison system, because without that, there will be no prison places. That means police may have to stop making arrests. That means the courts will have to stop trying cases. So that balancing act is one that this Prime Minister and this Justice Secretary will have to grapple with and will grapple with.
Right,
but look, that balancing
some
act
kind of early releases may well have to happen. That is not it's not a policy that you are ditching.
Well, look, we'll have to see. We'll make that assessment over the coming days and weeks. But what is absolutely clear, and the Prime Minister has said it again today during his visit in Essex, that we have to have a functioning prison system. That is at the backbone of any criminal justice system, any country which respects law and order. I'm absolutely confident that the Prime Minister and the Justice Secretary will make sure that happens. But of course it's right that we continue to review the policy to make sure that we have a sustainable operating prison system, but also that we have a public safety at the forefront of our minds. Now, that, as I said, is always the challenge for government.
My point is, you're talking about having a fully functioning prison system. You know, the previous Justice Secretary, David Lammy, said that without early release, there would be no capacity in prisons in England and Wales by November. And Shabana Mahmood introduced the scheme, saying she wanted to revert a total breakdown of law and order. So can you have a functioning prison system, to use your words, with or without this policy? Do you need it at some point in the mix?
But Cathy, if I may, of course, you know, Shabana was absolutely right when she brought forward these changes, and the last Justice Secretary was right about how critical they are to ensuring that we have sustainability in our prison system. But of course, in a really complex... But Cathy, hold on. In a really complex, huge piece of legislation which affects thousands of different offenders, where there is new community punishment arrangements and community safety measures too, of course it's right that we continue to keep under review what we can do to ensure that the public is kept safe, because that is the priority for this Prime Minister, it's the priority for this new Justice Secretary, while maintaining a prison system. Now, that is the challenge, and it's absolutely right, especially when there's a new government, but in fact, generally, that governments keep those arrangements under review, and that's what we'll be doing.
And you've got 3,000 spare prison places at the moment in England and Wales. If you don't do some kind of early release scheme, that headroom will disappear fairly quickly. I mean, David Lammy was saying by November. So when you say you keep it under review, this policy has not gone, and it could be brought back at any moment if you need to.
Well, look, what we're going to be doing is over the next few days and weeks, we'll be setting out how we are going to be implementing the Sentencing Act measures. But we'll be keeping under review constantly, because any vigilant government would, of course, keep under review the numbers of people who are going into prison, the number of people who are going out of prison, who those people are, how we're keeping the public safe, making sure that we're building more prison places, which is what this Labour government is doing, building prisons at a scale that we haven't seen since the Victorian era, and maintaining a functioning law and order system. That's the priority for this Prime Minister, it's the priority for this new Justice Secretary, and I'm delighted to be helping them with it.
OK, the 14th Justice Secretary since 2010, by the way. But let me just clarify, this review, is it going to take days, weeks, months?
Well, the Justice Secretary will be setting it out over the next few days and weeks, I'm sure. There is some urgency to this because, of course, we have to ensure that we have that prison system which is functioning. But look, let's not preempt what the Justice Secretary and his review comes to.
Does a functioning prison system require a lot of extra investment? Because we've had the Prison Officers Association talking about their serious concerns about early release schemes. They've written a letter to the Prime Minister saying they want investment in prison capacity, staff, probation, rehabilitation. You've got to find extra cash, haven't you?
Well, we've already done an awful lot, actually, because, as I said before, we've invested more in prison capacity than any government for many, many decades, building 3,200 places in the first 2 years of a Labour government, and that compares to just 500 places over 14 years of Conservative government. And the probation system, which is absolutely pivotal to keeping our country safe, we put £700 million in. That's the biggest investment in the probation system for a generation. So we have invested more money, and actually now we've got to make sure we see that.
Does it need still more in your assessment?
Well, look, I'm not going to preempt the new Chancellor in his role just a few days in.
The Prime Minister has
I'm the
repeatedly this week.
Cathy, I'm the Justice Minister, sorry, and of course we always want more investment in the justice system, but we also have to recognise the tight fiscal envelope that we operate in, and of course, as John Healey, the new Chancellor, has said. Well,
yeah, how tight is that? I'm asking because obviously Andy Burnham has made £1.6 billion worth of spending commitments since he came in on Monday afternoon. You know, that is quite. So I just wonder. You know, each department has been asked to find extra money down the back of the sofa to fund these spending commitments and fund measures to help in the cost of living fight. So I just wonder whether your department, whether you see you've got any spare cash swilling around that you can put into the kitty.
Well, look, the announcement that Andy Burnham has made in the first few days as Prime Minister is absolutely aimed at ensuring that there is some breathing space for British people and British businesses in what is the biggest issue that so many of us are facing, which is the cost of living crisis. And that's absolutely right. Each announcement that he's made over the course of the last few days has been fully costed, has been fully funded by shifting priorities. And that's what we're going to have to do as a government, because there isn't lots of spare cash down the back of the sofa. But what we'll have to do is relentlessly focus on the priorities of the British people and ensure that the whole of government is stretching every sinew to make sure that every single pound we have is invested in the right place. Now, that is not easy in a big government where there are big budgets at play, but we've got to be absolutely focused on the British public's priorities. And I have no doubt that with Andy Burnham as Prime Minister and John Healey as Chancellor, that we'll do that.
Right. Andy Burnham has wasted no time in shelving these reforms, the early release reforms that were introduced under the previous Prime Minister. He's also spoken out during his campaign in Makerfield about the importance of trial by jury, calling it a linchpin of the system. So is he going to jettison that as well? Are you sure that that's what's going to happen? And, you know, is Keir Starmer's whole agenda here being ditched in the criminal justice sphere?
No, look, the Prime Minister has made it absolutely clear that he understands that the current situation for victims, where sometimes they're facing 5, 6, 7 years before their case comes to court, is completely unacceptable. So we have to get that Crown Court backlog down. But of course, he's right as well that we look at all the options that are available to do that and how we make sure that happens. But I have no doubt that victims and victims' voices are going to be at the heart of this government, just as they have been previously, and they will be continuing going forward. And that means getting that Crown Court backlog down. I'm
really unclear, because restricting the right to trial by jury was Keir Starmer's way of getting the Crown Court backlog down. Is that still government policy or not? You're in the department. I just want to check. We're absolutely committed to getting that backlog down. There's a piece of legislation before the House at the moment. It's past second reading. It will continue to go through the House of the Commons over the next few months. But the absolute number one priority for the Justice Department, as well as the Prime Minister, is to make sure we get that backlog down so that victims have their day in their court quickly. But does the right to trial by jury, does that stay or go under the new Prime Minister? Well, there is absolutely no prospect of ever getting rid of the right to a trial by jury. That's not what's being proposed in the legislation. Well, we'll be setting out the proposals as part of the legislative process, which is happening at the moment. But do you know where the new Prime Minister stands on this? Cathy, just like the issue we've been speaking about previously, where there's a balancing act between prison capacity and public safety and public confidence in the system, equally there is as well. We really respect the trial by jury as a fundamental principle of our democracy, of our legal system, and that will continue to be the case. We need to look at all the options to ensure whether we can bring the backlog down whilst respecting that principle as much as possible. Now, that's a balancing act. The legislation before the House, which has passed second reading, does that to a great extent, and it will continue to go through Parliament over the coming months. Jake, do you know whether the new Prime Minister backs the restrictions to the right to trial by jury or not? He's made it very clear that he will support any measures which bring down the backlog. What he has said, which is absolutely sensible, and by the way, Cathy, I think your viewers, when they're watching this, will think, a new Prime Minister's come into Downing Street,
He's got a huge array of policy issues on his desk, and he wants to take a look at them. He wants to have some conversations about them with ministers, with his new Secretary of State and his cabinet. He wants to talk to stakeholders, with victims groups. He wants to talk to lawyers. He wants to talk to his backbenchers. Perhaps he wants to talk to other members of different political parties to get their view. That's completely sensible. Now, of course, there is some urgency to some of these issues, and that will affect the nature of his reassessment and assessment of it.
Right.
But it's absolutely right that he does that. It would be completely foolhardy for a new Prime Minister to come in and say, well, I'm not going to look at any of this stuff. Let's just crack on. Of course he's going to do that. That's sensible, that's common sense, and that's what the new Prime Minister's doing.
So also under review?
Well, look, he is assessing all the policy options that will get to his objectives, which is let's get down the backlog in our Crown courts to make sure victims have their day in court. Let's build a prison system which is sustainable so we can lock up offenders when they commit crime. But let's also have public confidence in our sentencing regime as well. Now, there are trade-offs to those. None of them are easy. There's no magic bullet. Andy Burnham knows that. But of course, he's right, as the new Prime Minister, going into Downing Street to look at that again, to reassess the options and make sure that we're getting it right. Now, that is the care that we need the Prime Minister to take on these massive issues for the British people.
Jake Richards, thank you very much. We're listening to all of that here on the sofa. Former Labour Minister Caroline Flint and former Conservative Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng. Caroline, it's pretty clear, isn't it, that everything's up in the air, everything's under review. However, what's also clear is that early release scheme will be back before you know it, if they need to.
Look, I think it's fair to look at the situation about our prisons and their capacity. And I think when Shabana Mahmood was the Justice Secretary of State, one of the things was there were warnings going off all the time about, you know, they're too full. And that happened under the Conservatives as well. And you've got to deal with, and it will happen again. The answer is build more prisons. And I know, and actually Jake did say, I think he said something like 2,000 places have been created since 2024.
Yeah, I did a little fact check on that. It's 3,200 and it's net. That's gross, not net.
Okay.
But, you know, shamefully low under
Conservatives. There's more happening. And they're planning not only to build more prisons, they're looking at building more cell blocks on estates at the moment. But fundamentally in all of this is, it's not going to fly if you say to victims of crime, particularly serious crimes, violent crimes, that somehow they have to pay the price for the fact it's not about releasing people because they've behaved well, they've shown remorse or anything else. It's because the prisons are full. Well, and Andy recognises that.
We're going to discuss this more in just a second, but I just want to put to you, Kwasi, the figure for the Conservatives, the number of jails they built in 14 years, net total of 482 places, just 34 a year.
Yeah,
I mean, that's pathetic,
and that was why it was a big problem. But if you're going to release prisoners, you've got to work it. Now, hang on. I mean, I let you finish.
It's a
but the issue here is that there is a policy about which prisoners you release. And in the case of the policeman, arbitrarily, there was a distinction between the murderer and people who were convicted for manslaughter.
Yeah, but
now, in terms of the common sense, of it, why would you make a distinction between someone who killed the policeman through manslaughter and someone who was convicted for murder? That was the insanity of that particular case.
You're not letting me in because you don't want to answer this
question. You're putting stuff to me, and I'm looking at the issue and saying the issue wasn't about release; it was about releasing the wrong people.
But
that was a policy distinction.
My point is, the government is saying they had to release a whole load of people they didn't want to release because you built a net total of 34 cells a year. You can bash the Tories, Cathy, as much as you want. I'm not bashing, I'm just
you're saying
giving you the
facts.
facts.
The Tories' fault. And I'm saying, no, this government, partially, but this government, if you actually listen to what I'm saying, is they've made political choices about which prisoners they've released. And to draw an arbitrary distinction between people who've been convicted for manslaughter and people who've been convicted for murder was wrong, and that's what the Prime Minister said.
I want to come back to this, but we've got someone waiting on the other end that we've been trying to get to. So let's go now to Steve Gillen, General Secretary of the Prison Officers Association. He's been patiently waiting. Steve, sorry to keep you waiting, but you know we had quite a lot to get through. Was the government right to halt this early release scheme or not?
Well, Catherine, before I answer that question, I listened to those politicians of all different political parties, from past Labour to the Conservatives and to the present Minister, and by God, do they talk a load of rubbish at times. They've all created the environment that my members operate in now, quite frankly, between them, and none of them get off with a free pass. So I'm not here to massage anybody's ego, but I'll get back to the point that you just asked. Was he right to pause Yes, he was, quite frankly. He's made an extremely brave decision because victims and the protection of the public should always come first.
Right, but Steve,
you know,
isn't it also
Caroline
the
Flint.
case? Steve, isn't it also the case that, yes, they've paused and you support that, but sooner rather than later, he's going to have to be forced to reintroduce that early release scheme because the jails will fill up again because not enough places have been built?
Well, the jails have been full since about 1994 onwards, so there's no difference there. It's just got worse as time's gone on. You know, we were talking about overcrowding in 1994 when we had 43,000 prisoners. Now we've got 87,000 prisoners, and it's not getting any better. It's just a revolving door. But let me get to the point about early release schemes. We supported Alex Chalk as Secretary of State in the previous government when the Conservatives started releasing them, because there was a set criteria in order to do it. When Shabana Mahmood then came in, when Labour won the election in 24, it was a complete and utter shambles. We were nearly at the point of having no space left. And we backed, as a trade union, Shabana Mahmood because there was a set criteria with exclusions built in. But there's no exclusions built into this. We're releasing into the public domain rapists, paedophiles, people that have committed horrendous domestic violence against women and girls, and also violence. You've heard the issue about PC Harper. That was vile as well. So,
and Steve, just when you hear
Andy Burnham
saying we had no choice because the jails were so full, we had to release the more serious offenders too. Do you think they did have a choice? That they, you know, they could have avoided?
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, they do have a choice. They have an absolute choice. And that choice is looking at, firstly, the amount of remand prisoners they've got, which is sitting at 19,000 in England and Wales. Do they all need to be remanded in custody? Look at low-level, white-collar workers who have committed non-violent offences. Prisons should be... There's no doubt our prisons are overcrowded, and there's lots of people that are put into prison that should be diverted away from prison in the first place, such as the mentally ill, such as drug addicts and so forth. But the reality for me is I listen to all political parties and they all compete and use us as a political football, and my members are screaming out actually for some action, let alone words. We have reviews after reviews. Now we've got another one from Amber Rudd, who was actually part of the problem. So maybe you should shelve that and pause that. Well, I really want to have an urgent meeting with Alex Chalk so that we can get to the root causes of this and actually deal with it rather than listening to politicians squabble.
Yeah.
Alex Norris, who's actually a very decent guy.
Right, so can you just spell out briefly, if you would, how close to breakdown jails in England and Wales are currently?
There's been a prison crisis for at least 10 years, and we've been close to it every single day of those 10 years. It's just that nobody takes any notice in the political world, or indeed the media, because it's out of sight, out of mind, and it's not really as sexy as education, as nursing, as teachers, because the general public meet all those people. They only meet prison officers when they get sentenced and they come into jail. So the reality is our prisons have always been close to the brink. What we need is not just a review of prisons and the prison population. And by the way, Caroline Flint is wrong. You cannot build your way out of a crisis. That is absolute nonsense to suggest that you can, because prisons take a long time to build and they won't come on stream till at least 2030, 2032. So
Steve,
that's a non-starter.
Right, I'll put that back to her in just a second. Just one final point. You've written to the Prime Minister. You want investment in prison capacity.
I have.
You want investment in staff, probation, rehabilitation. Where's that money going to come from?
Well, they can always find money for wars, can't they? So I'm sure they can find money to... It's not just the prison service, by the way. It's the whole criminal justice system. You cannot look at prisons in isolation. You've got to look at policing. You've got to look at the courts. 80,000 backlog of Crown Courts sittings. 328,000 magistrates backlog. So this isn't going away anytime quick.
Right. Well, Steve, I'm sure
if we actually go back to what the pandemic was like, we actually dealt with things. And I'm sure we can do it again. Nothing's insurmountable.
Well, Steve, I'm sure that we will be talking again because this story isn't going to go away. And I take your point about the media not covering it. But, you know, we've covered this story 2 nights this week. So I'm sure we'll get you back on. Thanks so much.
You certainly have. Thank you.
Steve, I mean...
Well, I mean, I wish I'd had a longer Steve to make my case. It's not binary, this. He is absolutely right. You know, the prison population has grown. Some of that is unnecessary, and I think his point about people on remand who might be better tagged in the community while they're waiting to come to court is a really important. And then there's the probation service as well. And of course, you know, I'm not trying to get, but we had a sort of an experiment which privatised part of the probation service. And it was all over the place and then had to be brought in. And those
the point he made was that you're all blaming each other and you're all to blame.
I'm not blaming, right, OK. I had 3 prisons in my constituency. We had a 4th in Rosie Winterton's constituency. So I had an open prison, which was for 18 to 21-year-olds, and later on adults came in there for their last 6 months of their sentence. And then we had medium secure and other prisons locally. I've been into those prisons. I've seen what's happened. I've seen excellent works by members of the Prison Officers Association. And when I was a Home Office Minister, when we did our drug intervention programme to tackle the drugs that were in prison, but also people who went into prison on drug offences and then came out.
Okay.
But there's a load of issues here. You have to build, and that takes time. But meanwhile, what you've got to address is a pretty poor approach to supporting the rehabilitation of prisoners when they're in prison, but when they leave, the housing and other things that they don't go into well. But at the same time, you cannot expect victims to deal with the burden of people coming out of prison who have created crimes against them to just solve the prison crisis.
And Steve made it very clear that there was a choice. The government did have a choice not to release the most serious offenders.
That was the issue. The issue wasn't the overcrowding, which he says has happened over 30 years. The issue was, who do you decide to release? And that was a political choice. And the idea that the murderers were not released, but someone who manslaughter, killed a policeman and was convicted of manslaughter was released, that was the PC Harper case. That's what blew this whole thing into the public domain. And it was completely ridiculous. And that was a political choice.
What also
it was
blew
a
into the
political
domain
choice.
Was victims, thousands of victims receiving letters putting them on notice.
That's true. I accept that. But the point he made, forgive me, was about the criteria you use to release. And he said white-collar criminals, people on remand, yes. But not people who've killed policemen on manslaughter.
And he did say that both under Alex Chalk and Shabana, when she first came in and was having to do with this, they both had criteria. I think I heard him say that. Somewhere along the way, between that and where we are today, suddenly we've had a piece of legislation be passed which has basically said you can serve a third of your sentence and you'll be up for release. Now, that doesn't mean that if you commit a crime, you won't be back in. But, you know, you've got to have the infrastructure to deal with these people.
That's true.
And you've got to make choices. I agree with you.
That's true, but there are choices. You can't release rapists and killers.
We're not on
That's what they're doing.
We're not on opposing sides
but
about
that's
that.
what's happened.
And we will discuss this.
That's right.
That's
let's just remember what's happened this week. That is why the new Prime Minister, Andy Burnham, has said, I'm not happy about this. I've got to look at this, and whatever else, my priority is to mitigate any harm to victims and the public.
And we will be back discussing this, I have no doubt at all. Thank you both very much for now. But that story will feature heavily, I'm sure, on our late-night programme, The Wrap, tonight from 10 p.m. Joining Gillian Joseph to discuss all of today's big stories and the best of tomorrow's papers will be The Guardian columnist Zoe Williams and the Chief Executive of Total Politics Group, Mark Wallace. Well, now, another day, another 6 a.m. announcement from Downing Street. This time, Andy Burnham targeted pubs with 20% knocked off rates for pubs, clubs and live music venues across England from April next year. As you'd expect, he made the announcement from a pub in Essex.
This is a first step today, but it's an important step. I made this commitment in the Makerfield by-election because we're losing pubs. Pubs need to know that the cavalry is coming. This is, to me, our heritage. It's working class culture. Once pubs are gone, they don't come back. So we've just got to signal what support when we can. That's why I've made this early announcement.
Caroline and Kwasi are on the sofa tonight. I mean, Caroline, we totted up £1.6 billion worth of spending commitments since the beginning of the week. That's quite some splurge, isn't it?
Yeah, it does sound like a lot of money. I mean, of course, he's been answering questions about where he's going to find the money from. I mean, I think actually he's sort of, in this first week, I think more of the public have got a flavour of the person who Andy Burnham is. And that is a person who I think who can cut through on some big issues. He did talk about the hospitality industry, actually, in a 20% cut. And he talked about during the, I think in the by-election campaign, that some of the areas where get beneficial business rates, such as these warehouses outside our town centres, looking at how there should be an adjustment there. But I think people are sort of seeing this, sort of what is important to Andy and where he thinks we can make things different. And of course, at the end of the day, like any politician, he's got to produce the numbers. But
Well,
he set out his stall, and I think it's good.
Former Chancellor, these are your kind of policies, aren't they? Tax cuts for small businesses like pubs.
Well,
even the electricity bills thing. You did that in Ukraine, didn't you?
They're spending. Yeah, we did, and that was one of the issues we had. The issue that he's got, which it's a nice honeymoon period. He wears open neck shirts and he can.
So do you?
Much more fluid. Yeah, that's fine. I mean, it's fine. I'm not, he's the Prime Minister. I'm a pundit, so that's the difference. But
it's all changed now.
He's got a more relaxed style, clearly, than Keir Starmer. But the problems haven't gone away. And the intense focus on the media coming back after the summer recess will be on, and the politicians will be, how are you going to spend, how are you going to raise enough money to fund all your promises? And the whole debate will be about tax rises, because that's what we're heading for. That's what we're heading for. First budget, they raised it by 40 billion. Second budget, last year, taxes went up 26 billion. The question will be, how much are you going to raise in tax and who's going to pay for it?
Right.
And all the focus will be on that.
Well, stay there, because we are going to be discussing an interview with Dame Maureen Lipman next, so stay tuned.
I am a Kemi Badenoch supporter. I think she's amazing.
Wow.
She's absolutely a truthful politician, and I'd never voted Tory in my life.
No, I was going to say, you used to be a socialist.
Absolutely.
So Kemi Badenoch has your vote?
She does.
Well, now, after a career spanning well over 50 years, Dame Maureen Lipman has achieved national treasure status. From appearing in films from The Pianist and educating Rita to those BT ads to Coronation Street and writing books, at the age of 80, she's still not tempted to put her slippers on. She's currently appearing in the West End, playing the relentlessly happy, her words, Allegra. I spoke to her a little earlier. Maureen, what a pleasure. Lovely to meet you.
Good to meet you.
Come on in. This is the last show of the summer, so you are our star guest. Dame Maureen Lipman, great to have you on the show. I want to talk about Allegra, your new play. You play an ageing woman who can't stop singing. Was that liberating? I mean, I love karaoke, so it's...
Do you?
Yeah.
No, she is relentlessly happy and bursts into song, and we see some of that. I mean, she says in the play, sometimes I sing out loud and I know I am, but other times it's like it's happening inside my head, like a private performance with a full orchestra but no audience, and I can't tell the difference.
I mean, relentlessly happy is needed right now, isn't it?
Oh, honestly. I don't know, was it always this bad, or do we just get too much news?
Well, yeah, what's your answer to that question?
Yeah, we get too much news.
Right.
I mean, and good news, like playing a good person, is not attractive, you know. You have to have something painful in order to be interested, it seems. But now, with the sort of the endless Rolodex of Donald Trump, your jaw is permanently on the floor.
Yeah.
You know, a sick man is leading the world.
Do you switch off social media and news?
I don't do social media except for buying blouses that don't fit. I do that.
Sounds like you're good off it then. But, I mean, when it comes to checking out what Trump's saying, a sick man running the world...
Yeah, I do a bit of that. I look and I like everybody else, I think, well, I'm helpless. I'm helpless in this world. I don't want to leave it like this. I want to, I want an Allegra, a lot more kindness, happiness, the rest of the things that we grew up believing were good things. You know.
It's interesting because Allegra, there's a lot of happiness there, but it does touch on some quite serious, concerning issues, for example, about how do you age well, social care.
Yes.
She hires, well, her family hires a carer, don't they, for her?
They do, and she's a Czech lady, and it turns out they really bond, and she joins in the singing in Allegra's head. So even the audience is involved at one point, and I'm on the stage and I'm looking at these people who suddenly are lit, and they're so happy to be in it, and they cheer and they join in, and, you know, you do feel better after coming out of Allegra. We only have 2 weeks left, so if you want to be made happy, come along.
It's a good pitch. We've got a new Prime Minister who's pledging to fix social care. We've heard it from previous Prime Ministers. Do you worry about old age and how you'll be looked after? Do you think he's right to say, well, you know, we've got to fix this, and do you have any confidence that he will and that the public will buy it and put money into it?
Well, I'd like to know where the money's coming from, because it seems to me that throughout my life they've been saying an extra this for the NHS, and it never seems to show. Although, on an individual basis, when people go into their local hospitals, generally speaking, they say they were marvellous.
Yeah.
So, you know,
there's a disconnect there.
There's a dissonance, and we only hear about the bad things again. I don't know about Andy Burnham. I have people in Manchester who say he was great, and I have friends in Manchester who say he didn't do a thing. He's certainly doing the populist way, isn't he, with pubs and clubs and, and buses. He's good at buses.
And we'll come back to how to pay for all of that and, you know, how you'd feel about paying for that yourself. But let's go back to the play, because it's become, you know, you've become sort of embroiled in, you know, current debate about the Middle East, you know, protesters turning up at the theatre, pro-Palestine protesters. You were targeted because of your support for Israel. How intimidating, how concerning was that for you?
It was pretty scary in Glasgow, because they were right outside my dressing room and there were drums and loud hailers, and they were handing out leaflets which said Maureen Lipman supports genocide, which is, I would have thought, libellous. I mean, I never understand why the race relations bill isn't used in cases like, you know, death to the IDF. And how can you say the stuff that these people say? First of all, it's not a genocide. You know, in 2000 there were 1 million Palestinians, and now there are 2 million. So we're doing it badly if we're doing it, you know. Of course, the young people have been groomed by paid activists, and everybody knows that. But somehow, cyclically, Jewish people seem to get the blame when society is having a tough time. 'Twas ever thus. King Edward threw us all out in 1275, and he said any Jew who remains will have to wear a yellow cross of 2 tables. So we actually invented the yellow star. You know, I mean, it's a complete madness that seems to be in the DNA.
When you look at where Andy Burnham stands on all of this, though, he has said he's apologised for not getting it right on Gaza. He's promised more pressure on the Israeli government. And, you know, there was a UN Commission of Inquiry last month saying that Israel deliberately targeted Palestinian children, resulting in genocide and crimes against humanity. You know, now I know, you know, there's a difference of opinion on that term and so on. But Labour backbenchers are pressing him to suspend UK military exports to Israel. How would you view that if he was to alter policy on that?
Well, first of all, it was the first thing he said in a world where 30,000 Iranian kids have just been murdered. He didn't seem to mention that. Nobody marches for that. Ukraine. I have friends in the Ukraine who cook for 300 people between 3 a.m. in the morning and 7, because that's the only time there's electricity. Get out on the streets, kids. Get out on the streets and march against that. Just don't make the Jewish situation the only thing you care about. And don't make it the first thing you say when you come into office, Andy, because, you know, you can't do anything about a junta in Burma. You can't do anything about... But you can criticise the Israelis for everything, and they are actually a very moral army. This is not my bag, Cathy. I'm not here to talk about that, but, you know, I seem to have to, because it is prevalent in every single thing. It's the first item. You know, they've gone into that school, which the Americans have bombed. They've gone straight in Iran, but they never seem to go into when the rockets hit an Israeli school. There's two standards.
Yeah, and I completely accept you're here as an actor. You're not here to have this debate.
I'm not.
And you get dragged into it, and I accept the frustration.
And then I get
there.
trouble.
Yeah.
I'm the representative here on earth of the Israelis. I'm not. I'm a jobbing actress in England, and I grew up in Hull in a nice Jewish family, and you didn't even talk about Jews then. You talked about Jewish people. There was respect.
It's difficult, though, isn't it? Because, I wonder whether you rethink your support for Israel, given, what you just said, Israel was a very moral army.
I support its right to exist.
Right.
And I think Andy Burnham does too.
But, you do defend, for example, just saying that Israel is a very moral army. When you look at what has happened to children in Gaza, a lot of people
they sent in polio vaccines, Cathy. They sent in food. So this
You think we don't hear about all of that?
We don't hear about the good things in any aspect of news.
Yeah.
And we are judged on a different standard. I'm not an Israeli. I've visited there, and I've found it's an incredible country. And, of course, they want it back, and they will not be happy until they get it back. They.
When after the Golders Green attack, and there was a string of anti-Semitic attacks in this country, Keir Starmer beefed up policing and security for Jewish communities. Are you confident, given what you've just said about Andy Burnham making this statement about this, one of his first public statements, are you confident that he has your back, that he will protect Jewish communities here?
No, because the numbers are not worth it for him. There are 245,000 Jews in this country, that's all. There are 16 million in the world. So if you want to pin the blame for all your unhappiness on a tiny 0.1% of the population of the world, then think about why you're doing it and think about why you don't care as much about what they call whataboutism.
Is that why you still speak about this? You still defend Israel and, despite the flack that you get, and you will get, and I accept that you're taking a risk saying this now.
Well, Cathy, I came on this show to talk about Allegra, and you've been really kind and you've been really interested in Allegra. But it's a news programme, and what are you going to talk to Maureen Lipman about if it's not?
Well, there's many things we can talk to Maureen Lipman about, thankfully. Just moving on slightly then, I mean, you were forced to hire your own security for the show. I read that.
We have got a wonderful security man, and I don't know how I'm going to live without him, actually. He's so good. It makes my life very comfortable and easy.
Do you worry about that going when you come to the end of the show?
I do.
I mean, Nigel Farage has hired his own security, says the state, he doesn't have any confidence in the state to protect him. Obviously, you're not natural political bedfellows at all, but has something gone wrong in this country that public figures, MPs, people like yourself, people like Nigel Farage are having to do that?
It's horrific to think of that. And you cannot help be afraid. You can't. Because the internet, for all the good it does, has spread an atmosphere of cancellation and hatred. Now, you might say it started when people could phone into LBC, Norris from Stockport, who wants to say, I want to, and suddenly everybody's out there attacking Joanne Rowley for an opinion.
Yeah, J.K. Rowling,
J.K. Rowling for an opinion. And we must go back to a place where we can have polite, kind debate and say, well, you can have your opinion, I'll have mine opinion, and we'll have a drink.
But you're scared?
But of course I'm scared, yes, I'm nervous. And yes, I've installed a bit of extra security, and my kids say, oh, just shut up. Don't be out there. So this is me not being out there.
Well, yeah, I'd love to see what being out there is. We were talking about Andy Burnham's first week. He's made a series of spending pledges. Are you, you're a long-standing Labour supporter. You parted ways over the anti-Semitism scandal, but you returned under Keir Starmer. Would you support, would you support a range of wealth taxes to pay for these spending pledges he's making?
I think my taxes are pretty high, but yes is the answer.
Right.
You have to support the people in society who need help, of course.
So are you with Gary Lineker and the 100 millionaires asking
to... Gary Lineker, let me make that perfectly clear.
But there's 100 millionaires begging to pay more tax. The government says, well, you can go to the government website and opt in. Are you one of them? Are you going to do that, pay more tax?
I won't be asking to pay more tax, Cathy, no. But if I have to, then I will, of course. I'm a law-abiding citizen. Of course I will pay more tax. And I would be very grateful if somebody could come up with an alternative, a real alternative to oil, so we can stop being held hostage and we can fuel ourselves.
So you're a bit of an Ed Miliband supporter, are you?
Well, oh, God. I'm just a girl who can't say no. No, I am a Kemi Badenoch supporter. I think she's amazing.
Really?
Wow. She's absolutely a truthful politician, and I've never voted Tory in my life.
No, I was going to say, you used to be a socialist.
Absolutely.
So Kemi Badenoch has your vote?
She does.
That is extraordinary. Tell me what you like about her. She's a regular on this show, by the way.
Is she? She speaks beautifully. She held the House during the Starmer years. She held him to account. She's attractive, she's thoughtful, she's intelligent. I like her.
Wow.
I don't, you know, I'd have to think carefully with my pencil hovering over a blue thing.
But at the moment, the cross is in the Kemi Badenoch box.
Yeah, I really like her, yeah.
Well, just finally, you were supportive of Keir Starmer, but obviously it was caveated. You said he was a decent and good man. Are you concerned by the brutality of his defenestration by Andy Burnham and his allies?
He was a good man, and he was, and I think history will treat him very kindly. I think that the 2 years that he was in, he got them in. I think he will be regarded as having done some good things. But it's a cutthroat world. I mean, the rate we go through prime ministers is absurd. We are the people who vote them in. It's not for the party to then say, that's not good enough, you know, and then put Liz Truss in. It's a misuse of democracy, isn't it?
Mm. Well, Maureen, I'm glad that you're not shutting up. It's been brilliant to have you on the sofa as one of our final guests of the summer. Thank you so much for coming.
Have a lovely holiday.
And you. Well, Dame Maureen certainly didn't hold back there. At one point, she did make that statement about, you know, the fact that she didn't believe there was a genocide going on in Gaza. She said there were 1 million Palestinians and now there are 2 million. Well, according to the UN, the state of Palestine's total population, that's the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, has risen since 2000 from 3.2 million to 5.6 million in 2025. But genocide is a legal definition for international courts to consider whether there was intent to destroy a particular ethnic or racial group. And the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, is currently hearing a case brought by South Africa that accuses Israeli forces of genocide. Important to say, the ICJ hasn't formally ruled yet. But last month, a UN Commission of Inquiry said that Israel had deliberately targeted Palestinian children, resulting in genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes in the Gaza Strip, as well as war crimes in the occupied West Bank. Now, between the 7th of October 2023 and the end of last year, more than 250,000 people were either killed or forcibly displaced from the Gaza Strip, according to the Palestinian Central Bureau of Statistics. And according to health authorities in Gaza, more than 73,000 people, including 21,000 children, have been killed in Gaza since the 7th of October 2023. Worth saying, of course, as well, that on that day, 1,200 people were killed when Hamas attacked Israel. Well, let's speak to Caroline and Kwasi, who are on the sofa tonight. You know, we have a range of voices on the sofa, and this issue, of course, comes up repeatedly, some arguing that Israel has carried out genocide, others as vehemently denying that it has, and we do reflect that range of views. But, Caroline, some will have been shouting at the TV, won't they, when they heard what she said about genocide there?
Yeah, I'm sure, and I think, you know, at the end of the day, lawyers have to decide whether an accusation of genocide, and it will be held in a court of law, as whether that's right. I personally do believe that war crimes have been committed and they need to be investigated. But I also take the view that that doesn't stop me supporting the right of Israel to exist or support Jewish people there or in this country against terrorist attacks against them.
So Kwasi, she's scared, she's hired security.
Absolutely.
You defend her right to say what she said?
Absolutely. Look, I mean, I grew up in North London, many Jewish people. I know their children have left the country because of the climate. And this idea that somehow if Israel does something terrible and appalling, then Jewish people in Britain should somehow be made to suffer, I think is completely insane. As Maureen Lipman said, she grew up in Hull, she's British. She happens to have a Jewish faith. But she's not responsible for what the Israeli government is doing. But this idea that there's somehow some sort of culpability that Jewish people here have, and they're a legitimate target, I think is completely wrong.
So you're happy to have her as a Kemi Badenoch supporter?
I was delighted to hear that. I'm a huge Kemi fan myself.
Celebrities are fickle when it comes to politics. I love them dearly.
Very much for being on the sofa, our last sofa of the summer. But for those with thoughts of far-flung destinations and time away from their desks, we're going to leave you with the vision that is Pitangui Island off the coast of Rio de Janeiro. It's apparently hosted celebs such as Tom Cruise, Jimmy Carter and Jackie Onassis. And if you fancy it too, here's the important thing. You are in luck because it's said to be the largest private island currently on the market for a cool $100 million. So get saving now. I'm off. That's it for tonight. I'll see you again in September. In the meantime, have a lovely summer on your private island or elsewhere. Good evening.